Darkness falls, and the magic of words come alive. I am the Gargoyle. I am going to be your host for this next session. This is a bonus little video just to say thank you for reaching 50 subscribers. I really appreciate it. Tonight I'm going to be reading one of my work. This is an unpublished work, and the title is The Culinary Delights of French Cuisine and Other Assorted Curiosities. I hope you enjoy it. So settle in. I am the Gargoyle, your reader on the dark. Paris. What can be really said about the city of lights and dreams that has not been lamented about by cat-inducing Hollywood movies? The ones where insert stereotypical male lead with more dick than sense meets insert stereotypical female lead with more silicone than brains on a bridge and falls madly in love, getting married and living the rest of their lives together till mother-in-law moved in. That's when the divorce started. All while the obnoxious radio antenna flickers in the background. If that's the Paris you thought you were going to read when you saw the cover of this book, oh honey, the coloring in books are right over there, just next to Hillary's autobiography. It was a bitch to find. Did I say that and offend so many sensitive people? Yes, I did. Being cynical is my hobby, so from the bottom of the heart, I truly don't give a shit. No, I'm talking about the Paris of romantics and anarchists, hidden deep between the veneer of tourist kek and glossy brochures, with people carrying baguettes while riding bicycles down cobble streets. The Paris holding on desperately to its avant-garde identity, while the looming black cock of Mickey Mouse sways ever closer to it. This is a story of one of those misunderstood rebels and revolutionaries, if only in his mind during a busy lunch service, that had lost his way between the grime and the romance of old Paris. Jean-Pierre Thibodeau, one Michelin-starred chef and professional asshole, the youngest holder of the rank of Chevalier in 100 years, executive chef de cuisine at Jacobins, his own private refuge of misery and once bright dreams. Simply put, he is a man, or at least he was the man. Overpaid and underfucked, Jean-Pierre's life was slowly, ever so slowly falling apart. First was the Michelin stars. Barely a few years ago, there was talk of Jacobins getting that famed third star. It was the talk of the entire Paris, and of course of the mob of tourists. Godless heathens, a place here that they are. But it never came. Some said it was a careless waiter dropping a fork, or that the breast of duck was a few degrees undercooked. Our hero took this news badly. I'm talking about going full Keith Richards on the Peruvian marching powder level bad. Jean-Pierre started falling into the trap of frozen products, and worst of all, he bought a microwave for the kitchen. In some parts of France, this would have been enough of a crime to send you to Madame Guillotine for the chop, yeah? But our shattered hero sauntered on, a broken shell of a man, and as expected a year later, Jacobins lost its second star. It now clung on with desperate determination to the last bit of recognition it had left. The more conspiracy-minded amongst the denizens of this bloody little town would whisper that the only reason the once famous restaurant still had a star was that the maitre d' blew the Michelin inspector in an alley behind the building. But I digress. Our story opens in the Marais, in the Haut d'Alsace, the one where Oscar Wilde offed himself all those years ago. I think it appealed to Jean-Pierre's sense of suffering artist that was so gravely misunderstood in his time. And cue for dramatic pause. It was just after 4 in the morning and the streets were quiet. Only a few drunken tourists, godless heathens, were stumbling home from a night of excess, and a couple of delivery trucks were moving through the darkened streets. Jean-Pierre's residence in this illustrious hotel was not of his choice. His third wife, Betch, had left him last week. She claimed the chef was never home to give her the attention she craved. Meanwhile, the mailman was taking her down the Champs-Élysées on a bi-weekly basis. They were having sex, for the slower learners here that didn't catch my tortured analogy. So she kicked his ass out, and we find him here, bleary-eyed, unshaven, with an impressive collection of store-bought bottles of wine scattered around the room. He wasn't even drinking the good stuff anymore. No. He was drinking the swill the Americans usually use for mouthwash. He had been up since 3, slaving over a prep list for today's service, hoping beyond hope to find inspiration and a way back into the Michelin inspector's good graces that didn't involve dirtying the knees and taking what Daddy was giving to him, so to speak. A half-smoked cigarette hung limply from John Pierre's lips as he furiously scribbled the day's preparation list. It was a study in tragedy of a man hanging hopelessly, Leonardo DiCaprio-lessly, onto a wooden board in the North Atlantic. Blue balls and all. Ideas of which vendor he was going to harass and threaten to stick in the duck press that morning, swirling around in the zoo he called ahead. Any thoughts of order and organization? A distant memory by now. Eventually our hero finished up and sauntered arse naked, not a pretty sight for even the most hardened of left bankers, to the fridge. This mirrored his life in more ways than one. Hope had indeed left this most tragic of places. He scratched his derriere and reached for a cheese platter in the back of the fridge. The cheese last felt pride in the Nixon administration as he pulled out the cigarette stub embedded in the middle. Shrugging, Jean-Pierre grabbed a scoop of the Comté cheese and scrubbed off the fuzzy blue things growing on top of it before biting down on it. In Paris, the tourists, godless, well, you know what, or the bitch of the 3 ex-wives couldn't kill him, then surely a bit of dairy wouldn't. Jean-Pierre looked over at the stove in a hungover state, eyes twitching barely coherently. This was his well-worn morning ritual, if he should or shouldn't stick his head in it and be done with matters. Jean-Pierre doubted if even the devil would take him at this point, and that Nick would kindly tell him to fuck off. Also, the thought of his 3 ex-wives arriving in hell one day was enough to persuade our hero not to shuffle off to the quiet eternal. With this out of the way, he mooched off to the clothes cupboard. The last cleaning lady changed her religion when she saw this pile of fashion faux pas. She did not last long like the others. Jean-Pierre never had time for fashion and all that, and his choice in apparel would make a gay blind man recoil in horror. It was fashionable in the 90s, but that's where it kind of stopped. Morosely, the chef sat at his small little table, sipping on coffee that was, I want to say, 2, maybe 3 days old. No one was really sure at this moment. Even the obnoxiously loud box of breakfast cereal was empty. So to sum up, just a normal, fucked up day in the life of the chef. One could almost feel sorry for him. It was just after 4 in the morning when Jean-Pierre slinked from the hotel, trying his best to avoid the overly cheerful look of the bellhop at the door. It was too early in the morning to be cute or happy. Walking down the near-empty streets was the only time when he could clear his mind and think again. He already had his prep list memorized and was now thinking of what to do with all the odds and ends left over in the walk-in. The foodstuffs might have had the slightest amount of patina on it, but it was perfectly serviceable to the standard American client. Standards be damned. The buckaroos would eat anything if properly dressed and sauced. A dark art which any cook with his skill practiced. Boil it, sauce it, hide it under some vegetables that still looked right. It was practically a service to get rid of the unmentionables in the dark and forbidding corners of the freezer. The Americans were simply casualties of war, and they didn't have a palate anyway. About a quarter of a mile down the road, Jean-Pierre ran into what he simply called Mugger number 5. This member of the criminal classes had been pickpocketing and holding up naive tourists for the better part of a few months, and had grown casually relaxed, if comfy, in a somewhat scummy part of the Parisian underworld. That was till he ran into our once celebrated chef. The encounter was brief and brutal, very un-Paris-like, and it ended up with mugger number 5 being hog-tied on the ground, incapable of moving. Next came the apple. Where Jean-Pierre found said apple was lost to Parisian tales of folk horror. He did not stuff the apple down mugger number 5's throat. That's right, kids. Let the image sink in. Take your time. The member of the criminal class saw the chef coming down the road, inadvertently ran his hand over his ass, and remembered the horrors of what a Granny Smith did to his psyche and his hole, and promptly made a break for it, over a chain-link fence, and gone. A howl of anguish, the only remnant of the member of the criminal fraternity. Jean-Pierre simply smiled and lit another cigarette. It was the little things in life that made it all worth it. Our chef was almost at Le Bon Pomme to pick up his daily order of fruit and vegetables when he spotted it. Hipsters. The swine destroying the very fabric of the city I so cherished and loathed. These creatures of the netherworld, Arkansas, well, some shit like that, would crawl out of bed at the most ungodly of hours and stalk the streets of fair Paris. The ones that, armed with a designer latte in hand, simply had to be there when the boulangeries opened their doors. They had to get the fresh bread and then Instagram it to their little soulless friends in fairyland. It was all about the experience, man. They would gush and generally make my life a misery. When I wanted coffee now. Not after these heathens tried to explain to the local barista that they wanted a shot of caramel and extra tutti frutti sprinkles on their macchiato. God, I miss the guillotine. I tried shying away from these creatures, turning my head and walking as fast as my hungover-induced brain would allow me. But it was too late. Like two cocained-up fox terriers, the two hipsters bounded over the street, tongues hanging out. It was too late for me to escape, and in seconds they were all over me, trying out their bad accents and stinking of the buffet line at some cheap second-class hotel. At the best of times, I was not overly fond of people, but I was hungover, and I had the motherfucker of a headache. I just wanted to get to the market, get my shit, and then drown my sorrows in a cup of coffee and a baguette. Dear Lord, I wasn't asking for too much here, was I? Will you take a selfie with us? It's so wonderful to meet one of the locals. They gushed in over-vomitous tones of joy and pure annoyance. The man, dear God help me, was wearing a beret and promptly stuck a selfie stick in my hands. The thing hung limply in my hand like some under-engorged penis as I contemplated the epic shit show my life had become. Please, a selfie, push the button. A rather rotund woman with a silver perm, unironic of course, prodded me in the chest. I looked at her through blood-stained eyes, wondering if the punishment for justified homicide was really that strict in France. I sighed and grunted slightly as I undid my belt and dropped my pants. Promptly taking the selfie stick, I reached back and gloriously scratched my ass with it, making all sorts of baby-making noises. Handing the now defiled selfie stick back to the hipsters, I pulled my pants up and nodded at them before walking away. Hashtag it. Most of my days were a misery, but there were perks to being a Parisian, like shocking a couple of American hipsters and putting them right into therapy. Now that my morning annoyances were dealt with, there only remained the slight issue of dealing with the fruit shop mob. When I was going for my 3rd star, I would only get the best of them, but lately their service has been less than stellar. Other chefs got first pick of the best produce, and I had to settle for the scraps. This unfortunate situation was easily remedied if a man was willing to go to certain lengths, and if he didn't have a soul. The shopkeepers at La Bonne Pomme would usually hear my approach like something marching down the Champs-Élysées circa 1939 and had a predilection for pointy hats and sauerkraut. A ball of misery and cigarette ashes, appearing to make their lives miserable for the foreseeable future. I was in the front door before they had a chance to hide the good stuff. Like a rabbit, an undersexed wild animal, I tore through the fruit market, digging in boxes and pushing away the less than desirable produce. I even managed to talk my way into their walk-in freezers to scavenge what I needed. The shopkeepers thought about protesting, but they saw the state of me and promptly backed off. I worked my way through a prep list in my head, knowing exactly what I needed for the day's service. I spotted a box of bright red carrots on a shelf and pushed the abominations away. Yes, I was the only chef in the known universe that despised carrots more than anything else in life. To my mind, they tasted of feet and disappointment, and never saw the inside of my kitchen. I found other, more insidious methods of making stock, one that did not involve the vaguely cock-like presence of the much maligned root vegetable. With my order nicely filled up and the fruit shop looking less than stellar, I paid the shopkeepers and absconded before they could come to their senses. I had work to do, damn it. But there was one more thing I had to do to complete my morning ritual. Coffee, pitch black, with 5 sugars and 1 vanilla macaroon. Then I knew I could somewhat face the day. I slumped into my favorite chair at my favorite Parisian coffee shop and called the waiter over. Coffee, for the love of God, coffee, and 1 vanilla macaroon, merci s'il vous plaît. Sorry if I butchered the French there. I said through a haze of regrets and sins too many to accurately remember. Would you like to try our vegan green matcha tea macaron, made only with organic, fair trade products that were aesthetically sourced? The waiter was new and didn't recognize me. I slowly grabbed his shirt and pulled him down. Coffee, black, macaroon, vanilla. My tone dark and dangerous, promising arterial blood spurting and acts of untold violence. The waiter gulped loudly and quickly disappeared into the back to get my order. I sat back and closed my eyes. Why, Lord, do I keep doing this to myself? I promised myself how many times that I would drink and smoke less. Yet, here we are again. Maybe it was the only thing keeping me going. That and the sweet smell of coffee and a macaroon being hastily conveyed to me. Dipping the little delicacy in the coffee, I savored the taste, rolling my eyes back in pleasure. I was holding on for dear life, and it was the little thing each day that got me through. I usually sat for a good 20 minutes over my coffee, aimlessly stirring the flakes of vanilla cake around in the black sludge. Usually by the 4th or 5th cup, I started to feel somewhat human again, the world making slightly more sense than before. After my morning dalliance, I marched back to the restaurant. Still had to take in the morning supplies and make sure all the stocks and reductions were up to scratch. Then, of course, I still had to deal with purveyors and all sorts of mutants climbing out of the cupboards, all hell-bent on ruining my day. I was about a block away from work when I smelled something in the air, something akin to a condemned Iraqi slaughterhouse that had been napalmed. The smell of cheap processed meat, of overly obnoxious clown cum, of sheer and utter fuckery towards the culinary arts. Clown food, I whispered in horror to myself as I rounded the corner and saw the massive yellow M logo before me. My standards may have dropped, shockingly so, some punters might say, but this was wrong. Wrong on so many levels. The mass-produced slop for the masses, the sheer vomit-inducing happiness of it all. This was an affront to any sane Frenchman. I stood in front of the gaudy monstrosity, knuckles turning white as I gripped the box of produce ever tighter. Eyes twitching in horror, I slowly backed away, keeping eye contact with the ceramic clown, the one with a smile, like he had just finger banged the family cat. Eventually, after the morning's frivolities, I finally arrived at my restaurant, Jacobin's. The place had a rustic charm about it. Reed, distressed, bordering on a food hall at a mental hospital. But it was all mine. I bumped open the door and gave the one Michelin star on the wall a quick polish with the sleeve. The remains of the other 2 stars remained forlornly empty, just 2 shadowy spaces that will most never likely be filled ever again. For all the screwed and fucked up things in my life, this was my last refuge, a place of my own. I was home. I really hope you enjoyed that. If you want to read any more of my work, I'm going to put a link to my books down below. And as always, I am the gargoyle, your reader in the dark.